So today is the 75th Security Thought Leadership webinar. These have been here every Tuesday and Thursday, some other days too, throughout the period of the coronavirus, where we've been debating topics of crucial importance to the security world. And the idea of thought leadership, don't forget, is that we're critiquing today, we're analysing today, we're thinking about what's happening today, in order that we may be able to respond better into the future. And our topic today is one that could not be more topical: the risk of public disorder. Where is dealing with this virus leading us to? And I'm very delighted to say that I'm going to be introducing you in a minute to three panelists from different parts of the world, from Italy, from India, and from Nigeria. And we're going to be talking about this risk of public disorder. On the one hand, the concerns about the response to disorder, because it's seen as being too draconian and unnecessary and unjustified. It's an infringement of civil liberties, or because governments aren't dealing fairly or following, doing what they say they're going to do. Where is all this going to lead to, and how do we respond differently? So I'll introduce my three panelists. Once they've all introduced themselves, I'm going to invite them all to make an opening statement. And once they've made their opening statement, it's down to you, the audience, to ask your questions. So can you please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, get your questions in early, and we'll endeavour to include them in the discussion afterwards. Okay, without further ado, the very first panellist ever to appear on this webinar was a certain Roger Warwick, and he's back for the 75th. Roger, introduce yourself first, please.
And here he is again, 100 years later. Thank you very much, Martin. My name is Roger Warwick. I'm a Brit. I've been living and working based in Italy for many, many years. I'm the CEO of a company called Pyramid Temi Group, which is specialized in travel risk management and assistance. I'm also working on a number of ISO standards, including the standard that will soon be published regarding travel risk management, ISO 31030. Thank you.
Roger, thank you very much indeed. Sam, introduce yourself, please.
So good morning to my friends in US, good afternoon to friends in Europe and Nigeria, and good evening to friends in India. So my name is Sam, and I was a colonel in the army. I did my master's from your country, so delighted to join such a esteemed panel. And I'm the co-founder of MitKat Advisory. It's a Mumbai and Singapore based leading Asian risk consultancy. So very similar kind of work that Roger does, and looking forward to this panel.
Thank you very much indeed. So from Mumbai all the way over to, is it Nigeria you're in, Una? It looks like you're there. Una, you introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much for having me, Professor Martin. My name is Ekhomu. I'm chairman of Trans World Security here in Lagos and around the world. I'm also chairman of the School of Management and Security, where we do a lot of security training, and we do publication of books. My most recent title is Boko Haram, Security Considerations and the Rise of an Insurgency. It was published in the United States and printed in the UK. And so it's good to be on this program, and I hope I can add value to what we are dealing with today.
Thank you very much, Una. Well, you'll definitely add value, I'm sure. Okay, thank you very much indeed. That's our panel, international in focus once again. Let's now hear what they've got to say about this topic. Roger, over to you for your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, we need to remember that pandemics have always been the harbingers of social unrest and of violence in the last centuries. I've done a short amount of research. I didn't need to do much research because the web is so full of these stuff that it didn't take me long to find something that's interesting. Now, a statement that I found is social unrest is the inevitable legacy of the COVID pandemic. I've also found a quotation which was dug out by a German journalist, Andreas Kluth, which is this: "So when our sickness and our poverty had greater wants than we could well supply, strict orders did but more enrage our grief and hinder in accomplishing relief." This was written in 1625. So the problems we are living today with our governments, which have been showing inefficiency, showing they're no good at marketing what they're actually doing, was happening 500 years ago. Thank you.
Roger, thank you very much indeed. Interesting point, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure. Colonel Sam, your opening statement, please. 3 minutes from you on what you think about this issue.
Okay,
Sam.
so let me cover let me cover three themes. First, on at a global level, basically there are three issues at global level. One is the health crisis, and very well covered by Roger. The second one is the geopolitical issue. The world is in a geopolitical recession. You know, when times are good, even the donkeys look like horses. But faced with such a crisis, the leaders were supposed to kind of rise to the occasion. Some of them have not. So it takes a crisis for leaders to shine, and some of them have not been able to do it. And the third is the economic crisis. So whenever there is an economic crisis due to massive lockdowns, and many people have lost their jobs, and people at the bottom of the pyramid have been badly hit. So when the lockdowns come in Europe, you know, the connotation is very different. When you look at a country like India, you have to, okay. So when you look at a country like India, you have to treat it, it's a country of continental proportions. So you have to treat it more like Europe. So India, each state would be closer to this in size to that of say Italy or UK or Germany. So the bigger states would be almost having populations of those size. So in India, the problem is not mainly social. It's not about lifestyles, you know, somebody impinging on your freedom. It's more about economic. And often people have to choose between, you know, getting ill or, you know, taking the risk of COVID and going hungry and feeding their families. So they say, oh, let's take a chance with COVID, put on the mask, let's go to work, you know. So when it is a question of survival, there is a pressure even from the family to get to work. So while the government went with a massive lockdown nationwide, I don't think that's ever going to come back. So that is in India. And at the global level, there has been complete lack of cooperation. And the third issue that I want to bring out is that if we look at pre-COVID, in 2019 was a year of protests globally. So the protests are making a comeback, and COVID may exacerbate some of those trends. So there have been protests for different reasons in different parts of the world. So there have been racial riots in UK. There have been religious issues in France, and that triggered elsewhere. There are, you know, there is a kind of a jingoistic nationalism going in. When there are problems within the country, people are trying to find problems elsewhere. So US finding problem in China, Pakistan finding problem in India. So I think jingoistic nationalism is going to rise, but that's not going to help. So these are the three big issues. One is India. The main theme is going to be economic. So we are not going to see the big lockdowns. Globally, three big issues: the health crisis, the geopolitical recession. How do we tide over it, and how do we kind of not get into jingoism and get people to kind of say that, okay, we have to cooperate on major issues like climate change, pandemic and all. Virus is the common enemy and we have to fight it. And then third is, how do we tide over the economic crisis? And later, probably I will draw some lessons from history. What we did not do right after World War I, and what did we do right after World War II to say what's the solution. And finally, the protests will return, and probably they may be violent, and they may take on regional overtones.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll definitely come back to you on some of those issues. Can I just remind the audience, if you could use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, get your questions and comments in early, and we'll endeavour to come to you. Okay, Uno, please, can we have your opening statement, your thoughts in the next 3 minutes, Uno, on what you think about this topic?
Thank you very much for having me, Prof. Well, here in Nigeria or in Africa, I think I can speak for Africa also, as well as Nigeria, we had a slightly different experience. While many countries had cases in millions, hundreds of thousands, and a lot of deaths also. Here in Nigeria, overall, we've, we just got a glancing blow from COVID. Till date, we've only had 66,000 cases, and we've only had 1,000 deaths here in Nigeria. So from whenever I started till today, we've only had 1,000 deaths. So we just got a glancing blow. But at the beginning of the crisis, that is April, May, June, well, it was late in March that the government, federal government of Nigeria, decided to on a lockdown, and that lasted for, let's say, part of 3 months. But it was scaled back as the time went on because they were able to see that we weren't so negatively impacted. And so they scaled it back. However, at some point in time, right around the middle of May, we had riots. We had street riots here. Not really riots by everyone, but riots by youths and some bad guys, some cult gangs. You know, they were like, you know, we're hungry. Something's got to be done about this. And but those riots were quickly contained by the police agency. And so that's what we've had. Now we've seen some of that trending in other African countries, like in Republic of South Africa, they had some COVID riots there, and then in some other West African countries. So I think what really is happening here, and of course, the main reason for the riots, I think I should go speak to that, was that people were like, it's poverty. We got to eat because most people are daily paid workers. They go out every day, they work, and they get paid for that day. And so when you have a lockdown, and in the case of Nigeria, it lasted 3 months. When you have a lockdown for 3 months, people really go very hungry because they don't have that much of a savings culture that would tide them over tough periods. Now, some of the things we've seen here associated with COVID, we've seen job losses, massive job losses. We've seen loss in government revenues. You know, those kinds of things, they've happened here, but those were not the things that actually triggered the public disorder we experienced here. It was the fact that some people were really hungry and they had to, you know, kind of come out and say, you know what, we're not going to obey this lockdown order. We're going to take care of ourselves. But now in response to that, the government scaled back on the timing of the lockdown and eventually opened the entire economy so that people can, you know, get their source of livelihoods. So that's what we have had here in Nigeria specifically, and then generally also in Africa. Again, the point to take out is that we just had a very small glancing blow from COVID. Yes, 1,000 deaths sounds like a lot of people, but when you compare like 2,000 deaths in one day in the United States today, you'll see that 1,000 deaths from March until now is really very small. And perhaps some of those deaths were in fact misclassified too. People who have died from malaria fever, and because it presents some symptoms like COVID, they will say it's COVID.
Yeah, Una, thank you very much indeed. In fact, we had someone on from Tanzania last week who was saying very similar things to you. So we're going to come back. Let me ask each of you, though, each of the panelists, given what you said, and you've all set a very helpful context here. Let me come to you first, Roger. How serious is this? I mean, if 500 years ago we had the same problem and the same issues, should we be particularly worried about these riots? I mean, beyond the fact they're not nice, is there anything more serious or sinister about these, Roger, than the ones that have been happening in the last 500 years, say?
I would say so, because we're up against the phenomenon of the new poor. Whereas 500 years ago, 800 years ago, it was poor people who already had little to eat, found themselves with nothing to eat. Now we're up against a new class of the new poor who are not used to being poor. They don't have the survival techniques of the poor. We're up against people that either had a good career, but just happen to be working in a business that is gone bankrupt because of the COVID situation, or we're up against small to medium business people whose businesses are being closed down by the government. So they are very much unhappy. They're unhappy, not just because of the problems of COVID, but the problems of the decisions made by their government. And these are people who are turning violent. And even when they're not turning violent, and when they're holding demonstrations and they potentially are not violent, they're being infiltrated by extremists, or from the right or from the left, and from organized crime. Now, political groups that are used to holding demonstrations are used to organizing, they know how to organize them, they know how to protect themselves and from extremists. These people have never been in demonstrations before, and they are very easily being infiltrated. Demonstrations are easy to penetrate and manipulate. And there's another thing we need to think about, considering we're security people. Security is supposed to be about defending the good people from the bad people. That's a simplification. But now increasingly, we're going to be defending good people from good people who don't have food to eat. So we need to think seriously about the mental health in both public and private security of our frontliners. Our frontliners are going to find themselves defending the good people from the person next door, who never did anything wrong up until recently. So we're going into a completely new social order, which plus the question of communications, and communications that weren't around in the 13th, 14th century and the 16th century are now around. Then it took 50 to 100 years to find out what was going on. Now we find out what's going on within minutes. So it's a very, very dangerous situation for those reasons.
Roger, thank you very much indeed. Sam, you were saying that there are protests relatively recently, so there's nothing new about protests as you set the context in your opening statement. Should we be more worried about these, do you think?
Yeah, you know what's happening is, I'll just take two things. So I'll take it up from where Roger left. Firstly, the pandemic is exposing the quality of governance and competence of world leaders. You know what happens in times of crisis, people instinctively turn to their governments finally to kind of bail them out. And when politicians and civil servants fail to deliver, they quickly can lose legitimacy and credibility. And so there is a contract, actually social contract between the citizens and the state. And the health of the social contract is determined during times of crisis. So when times are good, as I said, donkeys look like horses, and it takes a crisis for leaders to shine. And the second aspect is, you know, what Roger told about 16th century. In 16th century, what has changed now is the power of social media. So the power of, look, in a country like India, which is largely rural, you know, where a whole lot of young people are first timers to social media, and to them, social media is all powerful, and they are more prone to be influenced by social media. And people with vested interests are likely to kind of influence opinions and to carry their narratives into this. So the fake news, the social media, that adds another dimension to the problem. So quality of governance, this, and third, as I said, you know, this jingoist nationalism, this high-pitched rhetoric is not going to help, because, you know, somewhere we have to tell the people, look, fighting together, we have a common enemy today, and we have to fight the virus and not each other.
Okay, Sam, Una, you made the point in your opening statement that the nature of the protest was about hunger, gangs joining in as well. Una, is that different? And should we be more worried about this than we would be other types of unrest that have occurred? Una.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we had another protest recently here, a big one. It was called the NSAS protest. What happened was the youths were protesting police brutality, police excesses here in Nigeria. And this was much bigger than the protests we saw in the COVID. Now, the reason is this had a broader appeal. That's the NSAS protest, had a broader appeal. Many youths could relate to it, and so on and so forth. Whereas the COVID crisis was really youth gang related, and then it was focused. It was about getting food for their tables. Now, what happened? The corporate world stepped in here in Nigeria and provided some relief to, at least here in Lagos, which is a major metropolis. The corporate world stepped in and provided, there were soup kitchens, meal kitchens all around the city here, providing meals. And so that kind of assuaged the hunger, from these protesters. But I want to key in to what Colonel Sam was saying a minute ago about the quality of governance. I think we had those issues here also, because for one thing, we knew that the virus was coming down, but we didn't prepare. So we just had to react to it. We didn't have, before the virus hit, we only had 5 PCR testing centers in Nigeria. Well, now we've expanded it to over 50. So we went, you're not able to know that this is in fact COVID unless you are able to do that PCR test, at least at the beginning period. That's all that was available. I think there are more tests out there now. Now, we were short on PPEs in terms of protective equipment for the frontline workers. And we had issues also with no isolation centers. Before the COVID crisis, there was only one isolation center here in Lagos. Well, now we have isolation centers in almost every state capital in the country, and we have 36 states here in Nigeria. And so these were things we just had to feel our way and learn as we were going along. Of course, so back to what Mr. Colonel Sam said, horses and donkeys, they all look alike. It's only a crisis that can differentiate between who is a competent leader and who is not. Because the competent leaders who have done disaster or crisis or even pandemic preparedness ahead of the pandemic, and we have had protocols in place, we have had resourcing in place to deal with the issues of the pandemic and responded. That's put things out there, such that the frontline workers will have benefit of them and their small lives. But again, like I said, there was I have just a small joke to add to this before I rest my presentation. Now, the World Health Organization predicted at the beginning of the crisis that people will be dying like flies in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria. In fact, they said there'll be bodies lining the streets in Nigeria, because I think they looked at the weakness, the fragility of our healthcare infrastructure, and said that that's probably going to be our fate. But unfortunately, it didn't come out that way. Not because we did anything much better, but because of some other factors. I think we're just lucky. Like I said, I have my theories for why, but I think that's why we didn't see a lot of public disorder and a lot of violence here, because it passed us by. And that's my presentation.
Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate it. Let me move on, because Simon Chan's put some questions up, and running through Simon Jab's points is about how do we respond better? And Roger, I'm going to come to you first. Okay, we get the point about governments not communicating effectively. We get about the point about governance not being right. Does the response to this issue then rest on better government, better communication? Because it seems a tall order if that's the solution. Roger, where do we look as security professionals?
This should not be a security problem. This is a social and economic problem, which is being pushed into the lap of the security profession. There's very little the security profession can do to change the problem. All we can do is change and improve the way we deal with what we are given to do. This is a major problem. It's up to governments. And as Sam said, governments have shown great shortcomings all over the world, with the possible exception of New Zealand. Not one government has got it right. And it's governments in the rich countries that tend to have behaved worse worldwide. So as a security professional, I'm afraid to say we have no more chance to change the way things are being done than anybody else. All we can do, I'm afraid, is think seriously about the mental health of our frontliners, because we're the ones who are going to be sent out to combat the people who are fighting to eat. So there we have to think very seriously. We have to think about policy, and we have to think in terms of contracts that are made between the security companies and local government bodies that employ them. We cannot be the Pinkertons of the 20s and the 30s in the States that go out breaking up strikes. And there's very little to add on this point.
No, well, very good. I mean, it's an important observation to make. Let me come to you, Sam, because one of the points you made, Sam, and I mean, it was built on by Ona, but one of the points you made is about governance. And as Ona correctly says, surely that can't, well, let me put my words on Ona's point. That can't be the main cause of the problem, because around the world, it's the countries that we've seen that have traditionally been seen to have good governance that are facing problems, and ones that are perhaps seen to be suspect doing the best. Sam, it can't be that, surely.
Can I just build up on your point with
Please.
Slight disagreement? I think the countries run by alpha males are facing the problem. The countries run by women have done phenomenally well. So you mentioned one country, New Zealand, Miss Ardern has done very well. You know, Denmark has done well. Norway has done well. You know, so every country, Germany has done relatively better. You know, Taiwan has done very well. So every country run by women has done very well. So the problem is with alpha males. So let me come to 3 quick solutions. So I think first is we need to realize, and building on what Roger said, you know, my message as a security professional is we've got a common enemy virus. So we have to tell the world leaders have to get together to fight the common enemy virus. And it has to be on 3 fronts. You know, research knowledge we have to share and then get the vaccine and this out, restore global supply chain, get the logistics of vaccine right. And third is build that trust, bridge that trust deficit, which is so badly lacking. So we need a warning for future outbreaks. You know, we must have a system. And the second point that I want to say is that we need to improve the quality of politics. So there has been a lot of this rubbish kind of bandied about that democracies have been criticized for seeking popularity and not, you know, getting onto scientific advice and tough measures. Autocracies have been criticized for heavy-handed outcomes. So, I mean, so politicians have taken, you know, positions. My point is very simple. I think poor leadership will lead to bad outcomes, whether you are in a democracy or you are in autocracy. Okay, so Wuhan people knew, Chinese knew that there is a virus. Still on 9th of February, they had a massive public gathering. So I think it was an example of shocking leadership. And sometimes the local leadership has kind of made up for the bad leadership at the top level. So that also gets me to a point between, you know, striking a balance between agility and autonomy. So if we can kind of, and the final point relates to, I think, about economy. Nations will have massive debts. You know, I mean, South Africa is already kind of downgraded to junk status. So, and then they will have huge costs of borrowings, unlike, you know, we don't have the luxury of printing dollars like the US. So if we see, look at the World War I, and then those from Europe will probably remember it more than others, that if we look at World War I, after that, we didn't kind of get things right. We had a global pandemic and we went to Great Depression. We didn't get cooperation right. And we ended up in World War II, more violence. But after World War II, what happened is that, you know, we got the international cooperation right. Countries like US invested in their future markets, Japan and Korea and all. So that's probably going to be the solutions. The rich countries who printed dollars, they need to invest. So if US is looking at India or Nigeria as a potential market, they need to start investing. And we have to help these debt-ridden countries get out of it, because there is problem at national level, there is pain at individual level. So I think I will rest my case here.
Very well argued. Thank you so much. Let's ask Una to pick up on this. Una, you were the one, and I'm interested in this point that Sam's raising here. Okay. And by the way, Sam, I should say I was discussing this webinar with my wife before we came on air, and she was arguing exactly your point. Leave it to women. But Una,
thank you.
Let me come to you. Are you not arguing against your own point, Una, when you say that social governance is a problem but the countries that have been not known to have good governance have actually handled it better. What's the solution then, Una? If I can ask you to crystallize your answer, I want to get some questions in.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I think there's no substitute for good governance. Now, let's be clear with the word governance. It's very elastic. Governance doesn't mean only people in politics. For example, security is an element of governance. Security has an important role to play in a pandemic of this nature, not even before we get to the disorder, because I like the mission of security to prevent untoward things from happening, to prevent risks from materializing into loss events. Now, that is what I see security as doing as its mission. Now, but however, what I'm trying to say here is we have to bring our own skills to bear with the political elite, or even corporate elite, whoever it is we are serving, and give them the roadmap for preparedness, for pandemic preparedness, before the next one hits. Because it is that preparedness that gets you in a posture whereby, it doesn't become a loss, a major loss event, a catastrophic event. That is, for example, somebody just said something about South Africa and death problem. Even Nigeria, we had the same problem here. I mean, it's only now with benefit of hindsight we saw that we weren't badly or negatively too badly impacted. However, at the beginning, we thought it was going to crush, the entire country. But having said that, I think, so I'm saying that governance is not only for the political elite, it's for whoever is in that position to give that advice, that information. So that is one point I want to make. Now, the other thing is about the nature of the threat itself. COVID was a soft threat, but it's a threat all the same. And so what is a threat? A threat is imminent danger, something that's going to impact you, negatively. And then, so if you define it in that way, then you begin to get your arms around it, such that it doesn't come and wipe out either your company or your country or whatever it is. And so what are the vectors to address COVID? For example, testing, that's very important. So now you build up that testing infrastructure capability. And Colonel Sam, I want to congratulate you. Your country has done very well in terms of being able to do, huge testing because of also your population, which you have referenced earlier in your chat. Now, secondly, you have to look at preventive measures, masking up, hand sanitizing, social distancing, and, so those kinds of jingles and those kinds of messaging, once they are gripped by the entire population, well, not the entire, but by a significant proportion of the population, they become kind of second nature. And like we always say, prevention is better than cure. So we don't want to deal with the consequences, but if we can prevent it, hey, better yet. And now, what do you know? They say there's a vaccine around the corner, but we don't even need the vaccine here in Africa. That's the good news.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't even afford to pay for it.
It's fascinating, Una. It's fascinating. I agree with you. Okay, look at panel. I'm going to go through a few questions, if I might. So I'm going to ask you to be as succinct as you can in these. Roger, I'm going to come to you. And I had a question in from John Felix in advance. And John, one of the questions John's asked is about whether the response has been too much governed by political correctness, that there's a sort of, use my words now, a hands-off, a little bit of a fear about what's going on. And the sense is that governments aren't on top of this because this is a difficult one to deal with and everyone's affected, and there's a sense in which the governments aren't being seen to respond. They don't know what to do. Roger, your thoughts very quickly, if you wouldn't mind.
Precisely, you've given the answer already. This is the major problem. I wouldn't call it political correctness. I would call it politicians doing anything they can to keep their armchairs, to keep their seats. Now, two examples. In Italy, we have a very weak government and a strong opposition. This weak government has been changing plans almost weekly by following opinion polls. to make sure, according to them, or in an attempt to always be on top and to always have consensus. In the UK, our friend Mr. Johnson, when this started, had a very strong government. So he made decisions without even worrying about what the opposition, this is when Corbyn was still there, without even worrying about the opposition would stay. And he made the same mistakes for the different reason that the Italians made. Politicians are making decisions purely for political reasons because they don't know what to do from a technical point of view. And this is a very, very big problem for all of us. The other thing is, in what we consider to be the rich countries in Europe, in the United States, we mistakenly think that major disasters like this will only happen in the countries we consider to be third world countries. But the major problems that are happening, as Ona was mentioned, is happening in Europe, happening in the so-called developed countries. So this has created a crisis for politicians that is unheard of for them. We're used to saying how much money we're going to give in aid to a poor country that has diseases, that does not have food to eat. We are finding that we're having more diseases at home than they are. And this is a major problem for politicians.
Very interesting observation. Thank you, Roger. I'm going to come to you, Sam. Sam, I've got a question from one of the attendees. Can you crystallize why you think, why is it that, I mean, are you serious when you say that a female head of a country is important? And if you are serious in saying it's important, rather than just some other factor, why is the case? Sam, can I ask you to be succinct? I want to get some questions in from other people.
So very quickly, I think I'm just quoting data. So this is not kind of, I have whatever statement I made, I proved it with examples. The best countries, I think Taiwan was completely on top of it. New Zealand, you know. So firstly, mine is statistics driven. Now the cause in retrospect could be probably women are better multitaskers, or maybe just the quality of governance in those countries, or maybe the scale of problems was lesser. So could be a combination of all, or maybe plain luck. But the fact is very important that people who kind of were arrogant with virus have failed to tackle it. So that's probably one lesson to learn. And the second thing is building up again on what Roger said, the uncertainty about the virus and its trajectory is leading to a very kind of uncertainty for response. So again, the people who are kind of have strong governments, I think they should not go over the board. Like India kind of had a strong central government, and they went for a massive lockdown and the economy tanked by about 24%. Almost a quarter shrink of economy shrunk in one, of GDP shrunk in 1 quarter. So again, kind of, you know, or so to be dictated too much by popular response or kind of getting being arrogant with the virus, none of these helps. I think the balanced approach has probably helped countries.
Thank you very much indeed. Una, a question from Marshall Kent. And I'm going to ask you, because you've written a book on this subject, Una, and I'm also going to ask you to be brief. Will the likely unrest and social changes push these extremists into terrorist acts? Is there a danger, disorder, extremism, terrorism? Is that a natural progression? Una.
Thank you very much. Well, I think in terms of COVID, in terms of public disorder and COVID, I think there's separability. We can separate them out because the jihadists, they have their agenda, and we didn't see any jihadi action here when we had the unrest from the youth gangs. These are normal youth gangs that are here in society, and they wanted to flex muscles, get government recognition and all. But however, there is a connection back. Now, because of the lockdown, the jihadists were able to ply their trade. It was easier for them to move around and attack more targets because here in Nigeria, we have the concentration of Boko Haram in the northeastern part of the country. And so we had more attacks at that point, even though the entire country was supposed to be on lockdown. So the way to say it is that the lockdown, that is the response by government, facilitated their attacks, facilitated their trade. However, you know, we had a different experience. I live in the South, here in the South and in the Southeast, Southwest. It was a different experience.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I'm going to ask a quick question from Roger. An interesting point from Radhika Halder, because we're talking about how the world could unite behind a response. You know, in fact, Sam's called for this. The reality is rather different. It's sealing of borders and distancing of governments from people is actually doing the complete opposite effect. Do you see that as being a long-term problem? I'm going to ask each of you this question, but give you just 30 seconds each because we're running out of time. It's a question from Radhika Halder. Roger.
Yes, I do. And I think it's the same mistake that was made 400 years ago, the same mistake that was made 700 or 800 years ago. In the 1300s, the Catholic Church began to lose power in the whole of Northern Europe for the same reason. In the 1600s, we know what happened, and it's going to happen again and again. Politicians and those that rule are not learning the lesson, I'm afraid, and I can't see a way out.
Wow, Roger, thank you. Sam, do you agree?
Yeah, so leaders, yes, leaders must cooperate to fight the virus and to deal with the extraordinary challenges at home. And they must make a case, you know, to their own people that, look, the problem is not, you know, elsewhere. The problem is here. And we did international cooperation to get things right. We must restore global supply chains, and we must kind of write off debts for these poor countries, and people must invest in their potential markets.
I mean, in some ways, Sam, that does sound good common sense. It's in some ways you think, well, why is that not obvious?
Obviously, this, you know, we need to learn from history.
Well, indeed. Una,
people don't learn from history.
Yes, 30 seconds, Una, from you. Your thoughts on, are we coming out with a more divided world, and when it could have been a much more united one, uniting against a common enemy, the virus?
Well, I think the strategy of national lockdowns, I think it was a sound strategy, because take Nigeria, for example. I mean, let's start from Wuhan. The virus migrated from Wuhan into all parts of the world. And then the virus migrated from Italy into Nigeria. And so the strategy of locking down the national borders and refusing to let people come in was sound at the time, to give room to understand the virus. Remember, this was a novel coronavirus, so it had never been experienced before. So it was, but I think the work on the vaccine, for example, shows that there's a lot more in terms of cooperation from national governments, and then the good work that the World Health Organization is doing also. It's also showing that there is a lot of international cooperation. But that strategy does not contraindicate with the need for unity and cooperation, global cooperation in tackling the pandemic.
Una, thank you very much indeed. Panel, thank you very much indeed for a fantastic conversation, actually. I must say I learned a lot there. And you know, what's coming through here is the point about international cooperation, good governance, communication, learning from history. You know, really important stuff. Very much once again to my panel. I really appreciate Roger, Sam and Una for tuning in and giving your insights. Thank you very much indeed for the questions. Sorry we didn't get to them all, but I appreciate your questions. Thank you very much indeed to Hannah and Christine in the background for their input. And listen, wherever you are in the world, until we see you again, thank you very much indeed, and stay safe.